Joe, do you?
Yeah, why don't you introduce why we're
Go
here?
ahead.
So, good morning, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, I'm sorry.
Still on board.
I'm tired. So, we're here now to, first of all, man, thanks for coming back. And we want to address questions that the board might have in relation to the comprehensive review. And then we would like to continue with, hopefully, discuss what we can do for phase 2, okay? So I was away, so I'm not sure if any questions came through ahead of time.
They did.
Yes.
Okay. So,
Would you like me to pull those up? Nan, you have the questions. Would you like to address them in any, would you like to address them in a particular order or?
I can just start from the top, the way that they were presented to me.
sure.
Good.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
hold on, let me just get my speaker here. So, yeah, so there was, Mary sent me 4, 5, 6, 7 or so questions. This sounds like an echo. Is that all right on your end?
It's a little loud.
A little loud? All right.
You know what, we can turn down all these microphones.
Let me turn down mine as well.
Yeah, why don't you turn one off?
Yeah, okay. So,
Okay.
Is that better for, is that better?
Sounds better.
yeah, okay. It sounds, on my end, it just sounds like an echo, but that's okay, as long as you can hear me. So the first question was about architectural design standards and whether the hospitality recommendations included the idea of that just for Mabbittsville or Washington Hollow or what, and how do towns usually go about this? So I would say that the current zoning that you have has a section in there that talks about the need and the desire to have architectural standards. And the way that it's set up is kind of like when there's some sort of design issue that would come up, the planning board for a project before the planning board, or I would assume the zoning board too, they can retain an architect to help you understand the architectural character of that proposed building and how it fits in. And while that's a really good step, it's a really good thing to have in your zoning. I think the reason that we included the section in the hospitality study for design standards is because the zoning and the comprehensive plan both call for it. The comprehensive plan emphasized development that fits in from an aesthetic point of view to the community. That's reflected in the zoning, but that you don't have the tools developed at the local level to help you do that. And it's my opinion that the design standards that a community brings forth and that sets as a performance expectation for development should be set by you. Certainly can be reviewed by an outside architect, but I don't think that decision making should be left up to a consultant. I mean, I'm asked all the time about, what do I think about a certain project or a certain whatever, but you really need to set those performance expectations. And so the design standards really should be, they could be by district, they could be townwide. It depends that the design of commercial buildings, say in Mabbittsville, may be different than in some other zoning district where one might be more traditional hamlet village style, whereas out away from the hamlet might be more, of a more rural agricultural kind of theme, or to pick up on some sort of other historical feature or building that might be out in the area. So I would say that based on your existing plan and your zoning, that townwide architectural design standards usually they're for commercial uses. They're not for individual homes that are built. They're not for farms, because farms themselves are wouldn't be subject to the site plan review. But that you could fine tune them by area. And the other part of the question was, how do you go about it? Some of that is gleaned from the public input that you get, say, during your comprehensive plan project. From the hospitality input, we had a lot of input on when we asked people what kind of design of hospitality do you like. So you can start by looking through the existing information and the existing public input that you have. Some communities do hire an architect who kind of does an inventory and takes pictures and helps characterize what some of the the local flavor of architecture is. And there's always public input. I mean, if this is going to be made as part of your zoning, there would have to be public input. If it's just a guideline that you hope developers will follow, it's not quite the same thing as something that's in the zoning. But there's a lot of decisions along the line, and part of it is, and I could send you samples. Some design standards are written in the text, and they describe various features that you want to make sure new development has. Sometimes the zoning itself has illustrations or pictures in them. Sometimes the design guidelines are a separate section or a separate, like an addendum to the zoning. My feeling is the best way to go is when you have either a picture or some sort of illustration, because, picture is better than 1,000 words. And if you say you're looking for this kind of aesthetic, the better way is to capture that with drawings or with photos of an example. Not to be a slave to those. We're not looking to stymie innovation. We're looking to capture the things that are most important to you all. When you say, we want a commercial building to fit into our community, what does that really mean? So that's a kind of a long-winded answer to that first question.
Well, if I could comment on that just for a minute, I think my idea would be to just to prevent some far out designs that would stick out like a sore thumb or something. So, maybe we could have a generalization with some photos of, this is what we would like to see, which kind of would eliminate somebody from putting, a pink building up, with wings on it or something,
Yeah.
right. Some ultra modern thing that wouldn't fit into the community. Right. So.
And some communities
sounds like it would be a simple fix.
Yeah. Like a general statement conforming to the.
And you could do it verbally, and you could have a couple photos maybe.
Yeah.
Some communities zoning specifically address trademark architecture, which is often the root of some of these problems that we have, where you have, a Starbucks or a McDonald's or whatever. Comes in and they look like every other building they have everywhere else. And so part of what a lot of communities have design standards for is to ensure that their spin on development gets incorporated, so that you don't become any place USA that whatever comes in fits in, and is a building that is unique to you. Not all of them are, even franchise buildings are doing a better job these days, but, they still might look like the next community, but we can often improve by having design standards. We can improve some of the franchise kind of stock buildings that are out there that have no context for the location that they're putting them in. So it could be simple. It could be, it could be run the range from simple statements to more involved. I could send you models of, 10 points that we add in zoning to, a very highly illustrated guide. And you could take a look and see what might work.
Yeah,
That would be good.
I think that would
help us
be,
a lot.
yeah, terrific, Nan. And I agree with Bob. I think it'd be helpful for us to, instead of reacting to an application, have our standards set in advance of that. So that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then there has been examples of that kind of review in the past. When up on 44, when the bowling lane was converted, there was a lot of discussion of trying to make it look like a barn that fit into the aesthetics of the community.
Right.
So there has been those types of applications where the zoning board and the planning board have fleshed that out.
Right.
But having standards would make it a lot easier for the applicant.
Right. And I can't emphasize that enough, is that one of the things that's a problem for the business side of these things is uncertainty. And when they come into a planning board, the best way to be business friendly is to identify what your performance expectations are, and then the applicant meets those expectations and gets an efficient yes at the end. When you don't have those things outlined, then they come to the planning board and there's back and forth and design and redesign, and it almost always takes longer, is more expensive, and harder to do. So I'm a real advocate. Again, it doesn't have to be every I dotted and T crossed, but to give, some outline of what you expect makes it easier for the applicant to figure that out.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the second question was regarding the phased approach, starting with Washington Hello. Was the idea here to better understand what capacity the community can uphold and support? And I would say yes. I mean, I think that was grounded in that Washington and the hospitality going on. You're not an island in and of yourself, and there's lodging and all sorts of other kinds of hospitality things going on around you. And it's kind of like, let's see how this works out and how it works and how it functions, and before we move further. So I think the phased approach was, maybe more of a cautious, let's see how it goes first. At least that's my interpretation of what the committee was hoping to get.
Okay.
So any other questions on that one?
I remember your analysis of neighboring hospitality sites around the area, and I didn't know if there's, that question was my question. I didn't know if there was any kind of formula or best practice, that correlates, number of visitors per year with hospitality or populations with hospitality. I mean, it's difficult to anticipate because we're in the Hudson Valley, and that is, during the fall, a tourist destination, and in the summer. But I was just curious about that and how we look to balance that if we have more than one application at the same time, or just curious about the capacity question.
Yeah, and I don't think that it was based on hard numbers like that. I think there was a lot of unknowns, and the community, through the public input that we had, was very cautious about having too much lodging. I mean, so it was kind of a balance to find suitable locations at the right intensity. And so I think it was not fleshed out with that level of data that you were looking for. It was more of like, this seems to be the logical place to start. We have the location and the character and the situation that would work the best, let's let's work there rather than go further afield with it.
Thank you.
The next question was, when do you think it makes sense to create the village town task force? Should we be having those conversations now? Yes, the answer is I think yes. I think that if the town is going to update its comprehensive plan and to incorporate in whole or in part the various recommendations that were made in the hospitality study, that the town and the village definitely need to talk and plan for these things together. You interact and you're intricately involved with each other. So I think that having that task force to start those conversations is important, and especially if you're going to be moving into some sort of update or implementation of those recommendations, that there's really no reason to wait, in my opinion.
And that, am I right, Nan, in that, was it the consensus or the majority of people of the 2/3 that wanted hospitality, they identified the village was that the first choice, or am I getting that order wrong?
No, I believe that was the first choice.
That was the first choice. So it would make sense that we maybe should start talking to them. The village says we don't want it here. We have to circle back,
Yeah, it's, and that's
right, exactly, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot to consider.
So that's why there were also other ideas outside of the village.
Yeah, and and the village has its own plan and its own zoning, but you also are, two intricately related communities, and joint planning is always a good thing so that you're not at cross purposes to each other, especially with the town's comprehensive plan putting so much emphasis on the village as being the primary place for commercial development. So you got to coordinate with that. Okay, so some of the other questions, the next question was, with respect to Washington Hollow, was there any consideration to expanding the zone restrictions on that area, perhaps along the bypass up to Orvis as a designated place for hospitality? So we didn't draw a line around the map and say, these are the parcels that should be included in that location. I think that's up for discussion, and that's part of the next phase. So I don't think that we, that those are, it was kind of like a bubble. It's not a hard and fast, it stops here. We didn't do that kind of evaluation on a parcel by parcel basis. So that's open for input and determination as far as I'm concerned.
Excuse me, Nan, when you say in the next phase, are you talking phase 2 or phase 3 on that?
Well, I don't really know what phase 3 would be. I think that should be part of, the comprehensive plan update, and any zoning updates that you do would have to reflect that policy. So I think that it's kind of, I don't know how you're going to proceed. I don't know if you're going to update your comprehensive plan and then at some point move into implementing zoning updates, or if you are going to do them together, or if you were going to kind of take the hospitality report and create an update to the comprehensive plan simply by including that as an appendix and then moving right into the zoning. So I think it depends on how you all feel you want to move forward and phase this. But whether it comes at some point, you have to establish a policy of what it is that you want, and the zoning implements that policy. So whether you call it phase 2 or phase 2 and 3, I think you have to decide how you want to move through the process for that.
I think our phase 2 now, when we're talking about it, is in reference to sort of the next steps that you outlined for the town, for us kind of at 30,000 feet, having this conversation, right? Isn't that what we're all thinking?
Well,
That phase 2?
somewhat,
Yeah.
but then also if we would like to adopt this.
Right, as
And
an
how-
appendix,
as
and
an
then
appendix,
and then have
and
the
then
zoning come out of
Move
that.
on with,
Right.
exactly. That's how I would do it.
Right.
I'm not sure how everybody else would, but that's how, that would be my wish.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so I think that's, that's up for discussion and how you want to,
Right.
there's certainly different ways to move through this process, some a little more efficiently than others, but I think you need to decide what direction you want to go.
Efficient, Nan. We only want to be
We want to be
efficient.
right.
Well,
Wouldn't
to
it-
be
wouldn't it
honest with
almost
you,
make sense to-
the most efficient way is to include the hospitality, to update the comprehensive plan by adding the hospitality report as an appendix.
Right.
Appendix.
Or an addendum, whatever you want to call it. You still have a little bit of process to go, but that doesn't then mean you have to go back and rewrite, maybe it's a new cover that with a new intro. I think we
Right.
talked about this as a recommendation, a new cover with an introduction about how you got to this point, why you did it, why you're adding it into an addendum, and what you expect to happen by including it in as an addendum. So, that is certainly the most straightforward way. And I don't think there was anything in our report that conveyed there was, we weren't recommending changing the direction of the plan that you have, but adding more detail to it in relationship to the hospitality questions.
Right. Providing more context and detail.
And clarity, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, and it really, because it was such an involved process where we had a committee, we had public meetings, we had a survey, it was really a comprehensive plan-like process because it was so involved. I mean, it could have been just a report from a consultant, and lots of communities hire a consultant to do a report, and they come up with their ideas and their recommendations and give you a report. This was a community-based project that is aligned with what a normal comprehensive plan would have as part of it. And so I think you have the opportunity to be efficient that way if you want.
So Nan,
So the next
Nan,
question, yeah.
just let me get
Go ahead.
some clarification. If we took the next step of adopting this as an addendum or an appendix, therefore we're basically approving and sanctioning what that committee has done and basically have given them kind of authority post-act to attach that to the document. So now we've got a tool that we can refer to as we start to pull pieces out to build code that helps a planning board and a zoning board have some reference tools when an applicant comes forward and says, yes, this can go forward, no, it can't. But to do that, we have to adopt codes that parallel that addendum, correct?
Right. So the addendum, you can think about it, is that the addendum would, along with the rest of your comprehensive plan, establishes the direction and the policy and the expectations of the community. And the zoning then is adopted to separately with its own process to implement that policy in those directions. And just like the comprehensive plan, let's say you did nothing, you have lots of ideas in your existing comprehensive plan that were zoning related recommendations that haven't been implemented. Some may be more relevant than others. So you don't have to be a slave to every item in a comprehensive plan, but the zoning has to be consistent with it. And there are times where a comprehensive plan will recommend to do something, and then through the next phase, it gets altered or shifted, or it becomes apparent that something would work better. So you don't have to be, like I said, you don't have to be follow it word for word. You have to, the addendum would give you that policy background upon which to be the foundation for those zoning changes.
Okay, thank you.
So the next question, did the committee ever discuss the zone restrictions which currently apply to Mabbittsville area with respect to commercial expansion? And is the current restrictions a type of spot zoning with respect to those restrictions? So, we did talk about those restrictions, but our job was really to look at hospitality and not the broader commercial development expectations that you have. So it was discussed, but it wasn't, we never really talked about, should that be changed for a broader commercial development pattern in Mabbittsville? Because I think the committee felt that that was out of their, out of their scope of work that they were expected to do. We certainly on our end reviewed it and talked about it behind the scenes. I would definitely not, I'm not quite sure why spot zoning would come up. That is definitely not a spot zoning. It may be a very restrictive way of approaching commercial development, but I definitely do not see any spot zoning in that. And that kind of goes into the next question, which was the same, idea of removing the restriction of 50% of residential development has to be, so you're tying in Mabbittsville, you're tying commercial development to the residential development that you have with that. If you have no residential development, you have very little commercial development opportunity. I think that from a broader commercial perspective, that is, it's unusual. I will be honest with you that is unusual, but that goes back to what is the goal that you want for Mabbittsville. If you effectively want to limit commercial development, there's a whole range of techniques, including the one that you use to not have a lot of commercial development there. So again, it goes back to what your policy is for that. It is restrictive, but if you want to be restrictive, it's probably doing a good job of it. So I think that's an area that we didn't really get into, but in the broader sense of making zoning changes, that could be, it's not necessarily related to hospitality. It's more of a broader commercial and economic development strategy that you need to pin down of what it is you want.
Dan, let me ask you this question along that line. Hospitality is commercial.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
in your experience with other communities, when the question of commercial has come up and hospitality, dining, other types of non-industrial commercial come up in a community, are there typically restrictions beyond what the focus of the commercial zoning is? Are there other things layered on top whenever you develop a commercial zone?
You mean just for hospitality?
No, because hospitality is commercial, and because Mabbittsville and Washington Hollow are designated commercial, hospitality would fit into those communities because they are a subset of commercial. Is it typical in communities that to control the growth of commercial, communities put added restrictions on those zones so it doesn't explode into unwanted growth?
Yes, for sure. There's a whole range of things, ranging from lot dimensions, lot coverage, building size limitations, parking, access. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that a lot of communities do use so that it's controlled.
So that when we adopt these recommendations into the zoning codes, we are going to have to get really specific on things like parking, square footage, acreage, all of that. And that in itself becomes restrictive.
Uses.
Yeah, uses
Well,
itself.
uses.
Yeah.
Uses.
You know, many small communities that want, just going back to the lodging part, many communities, rural communities that want to have lodging, but don't want, like 500 room area, put restrictions on the number of rooms, which I believe was a part of the hospitality report. That's a zoning, that's incorporated in, would be in a zoning standard. So yeah, there's all sorts of those types of things that serve to control the size and the intensity and the impact of a particular use.
Thank you.
Well, the Mavisville zone, it was my question. The Mavisville zone is the only place where they allow hospitality in the town. But it can't happen there because there's no room for residential growth. And that's in our current zoning. So that has to change. But you, like we said, you could change the uses that we have. You could restrict them more. You could put other restrictions to it. But we have to get rid of that caveat of having twice as much residential growth. Washington Howell is different. Washington Howell is a residential zone.
Right.
And you can't have any, without special permits and stuff. So.
Yeah, and
So
the other thing is in zoning. Yeah, zoning can also, even within commercial zones, there are some commercial uses that require added levels. Like some commercial zones, it could be just a site plan review, and some uses need a special use permit that have specific criteria for that kind of use. So oftentimes, lodging or and pick any other kind of use, they would have something specific to specific development and design standards that would be expected for that use. So it can be multi-layered, both for the district and for a particular use in the district. The last question on the list that you sent me was, did the proposal include implementing changes to the code which were recommended when the previous plan was adopted? And I went back to look at the information that I gave you. So, that's a good question. We might have to talk about that. Because I would have to go back and review all of the zoning oriented recommendations that were in the original plan. So I can't answer that question right now. But I will go back and look at that. With that said, though, that I think that doing a zoning change is a big deal for most communities. And you don't just, every 6 months do a zoning change, or most communities don't do that. So if you're going to be making zoning changes, I think that it is certainly efficient to make the zoning changes, as many as you can that meet your policies at one time. So you have one process because it's, you know, one set of public hearings, one set of seeker evaluations, one set of resolutions and public hearings and so forth. So it makes sense to be efficient, but I have to go back and look and see what some of those other things are from your original plan that weren't incorporated into our recommendations.
Thank you.
So I will relook at that and send that to you.
Right, so if we're gonna do some changes in Washington Hollow and in Mabbittsville, just do them together,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, or any other.
Yeah, and there's a list of sort of housekeeping items that Mary and I
Yes.
keep and
Right.
planning and zoning have of things we might want to clarify in the
Yes.
code that just keep
Yep,
coming
and
up
we could do
before the
them all,
planning and zoning
kind of
board. Yeah,
Put them
do it
all
all at
together.
once.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in we mentioned it in the recommendations. And I think it was mentioned in your comprehensive plan, incorporating conservation subdivisions, which really has nothing to do with lodging, but it has a lot to do with development patterns of major subdivisions is a really good thing to look at, and figure out better ways of doing subdivisions so that they meet your community goals, maybe more than what you have now. So that would be a good time to incorporate something like that.
But prior to doing that, we still need to add this as an addendum. And then that's the first step. And then move on with whatever zoning we want to change. I mean, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
So the next thing would be to change the cover of the comprehensive plan to include this and then have a hearing on this, right?
Right.
And isn't that so?
Is that right now? We would have a hearing on the appendix, which is this
Right.
report,
Yeah.
for people to weigh in. And
Yeah.
Right, whenever you make an update to a plan or do a new plan, the process is that it has to be available for the public to review. You have to have a legal notice, 10-day legal notice, which is a little different than other legal notices. 10-day legal notice in the paper for a public hearing. You have your public hearing. It has to be referred to the county for the county planning board review. And you have to do a seeker analysis. So it's update to a comprehensive plan is an automatic type 1 action. So it's certainly required to do seeker. And then you would adopt it, but the board would adopt it as a resolution of the board. So those are the basic steps.
Okay.
So Nan, under phase
Simple
2, you
enough.
can help walk us through that entire process.
Yes. Yeah, and you know,
I
and
have a
if
question too now.
what was that?
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say
finish your
that-
thought. I didn't mean to.
If you were interested, so there's a couple different ways, as we talked about, kind of taking the hospitality report and making it an addendum. And then it's just updating the front of the plan to tie it all together. Other way is to create a whole new document that kind of integrates all of those recommendations from the hospitality report into the verbiage that you have in the plan, which is basically rewriting it and redoing it. I don't think you need to do that,
I
but
don't
it's
think
certainly
we
an
wanna do
option if
that.
you wanted to.
Right.
Because in 2025, we're already scheduled to take a look at the existing comprehensive plan for its 10-year review.
Mhm.
So at that time, maybe that's when you start to pull all that other stuff right into the document and you've got a whole new document established.
Right. So I think it's a pretty straight, if you don't want to do that integration now, and you formally adopt this into the plan, it's, you know, it's a little, you know, like I said, it's the cover and it's an introduction to integrate and discuss why you put an addendum in and you know, introduction, but I think it's a pretty straightforward process to get to that point.
Okay.
So when Mike just raised the question about Washington Hollow, right? And could, could that corridor extend for up to Orvis, for example? When you all were looking at the different areas and people were making recommendations, because I know in the survey, residents had to kind of identify if they wanted hospitality where they thought it was appropriate. What would the process be? I mean, I'm assuming there are defined lines for Washington Hollow, right? Now.
Mhm.
So that would be a whole other process. Would that be a whole other separate process if you were looking to move the line there? I would think that would be.
Well, that would be,
that's a
that
zoning
could be incorporated.
Yeah,
So
right.
the comprehensive plan can broadly say, this is what we envision for Washington Hollow, and the area, the Washington Hollow area should be either I don't know what the wording would be, expanded or including lands to accommodate this use, blah, 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 whatever we want to say about it. So the plan kind of outlines that you're going to do something in Washington Hollow. The zoning change then would actually create a new map that would include the boundaries and all of the regulations that you want to go for that zoning district. So I don't think you necessarily need the detailed map for the comprehensive plan. You need the foundation of what you want to see occur, but the very particulars of that would have to be worked out and discussed and have community input on, or at least town board input and then community input before that would get adopted as a zoning update.
That would be extensive.
And along those lines then, let me ask this question. For the last year, we've been looking at short-term rentals throughout the town, and we're aware that there are short-term rentals in the village. There are no existing codes right now that help regulate those, even to the point of having a registry to know who has them, where they are, who's the owner, and so on. We've been doing some research, collecting model laws from other towns. The state just did a big presentation in Hyde Park on it. One of the lawyers recommended a gold standard law that the state is looking at. Would we, because that's going to be a separate issue, but it falls under hospitality, would we roll that into the discussion of this recommendation that we're making an appendix, or would we keep the hearings and the research and the committees separate, just specific to short-term rental?
Well, the hospitality report included a recommendation to regulate short-term rentals and gave a bunch of lists of options of what should be included in the regulations. So I think it should be, if you have another committee and you're kind of a separate process, but I think it should all be integrated again, because you don't want to, my recommendation, if you're going to do something with short-term rentals, there's got to be a component in the zoning. You have to update the use table at the very least to say you're going to allow them or you're not going to allow them or whatever you want to do with them. So my recommendation would be that it be integrated into the zoning update. So we create a new section in the zoning for short-term rental, or integrate it into, special use permits, or however you ultimately decide you want to address them. And then you have one process. Again, if I go through multiple processes, multiple hearings, and multiple seeker, do it all at once.
Right. So we could have a separate subcommittee look at that issue, hold some hearings, come up with documentation, even adopt some recommendations, take it back to the board, but bundle it into the final adoption of all the issues that are necessary to make this final.
I would think that you would have to have multiple subcommittees on multiple zoning changes
This one is going to start very soon.
Absolutely.
But I think that the report, and Nan, correct me, you gave us kind of guidance that we need to look, or we should look at short-term rentals, but there wasn't a specific recommendations about where or the scope
No,
or
no.
how much, any of that. So I think we could, that would be a separate thing, just
Yeah.
like the other tally lists we're making of
course.
other
Yeah.
zoning, code changes we might need to
Well,
make.
there
for other
were some
issues.
recommendations about it because we did ask that question in the survey where we asked people what kinds
Right.
of
That's true.
mechanisms would the community think is needed for short-term rental. So it was more than just regulate, have some sort of regulation for short-term rental. So I think there's more guidance in there than just do something.
Right,
Good.
right. Thank you.
And I also think that for having a subcommittee that's working just on short-term rental is a good thing because short-term rentals are very complex. They can be very contentious. And it's an issue, it's a hot button issue right now that can often take all the air out of the room. And, I think it needs that kind of attention of a subcommittee that just is looking at that. With that said, the short-term rental kind of has implications. It has implications for housing. It has implications for affordable housing. It has implications for the hospitality. So it's a very complex hot button item right now.
Thank you.
So
So-
what happens if a lot of this, the recommendations were based on the buy-in with the village or placing these facilities either in the village or right outside the village? What happens if the village says no? The village residents say, we're not interested in having them. Then are we just saying, okay, we'll go forth and do our own? Or do we try and
Well, I
have more
think,
discussions in the village? And
I think discussions with the village on, say like a proposed hotel was going to go in Washington Hollow, right?
Mhm.
It would be nice to have a conversation with the village on what that impact might have for the village, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're asking the village, is this okay? Do you see what I mean?
Right.
But I think
Right,
what
But at
Mary,
the same time, if there's something going on in the village, do you know what I mean? Like,
I think the question, the village question was actually my because I
Yes.
thought, we should try to have those conversations now, maybe even just to identify areas or learn from the village board if they agree that might be something that they would accommodate. I mean, right now, what is it now? You can have up to 10 rooms in the village, or is it 7? There's some number that
Yeah.
you can have.
but where?
Yeah,
You know what I
I'd
mean?
have to
in
look
the-
that
I
up
think
again.
you
It was
take your
quite,
house. I think you have to get approval, but I think that's, sorry, go ahead.
no, I think it was limited. And I think that when you want to coordinate with them, they're going to care about what you do and where, and you're going to, just like you should care about what they do and where. And you want to have your land uses, at least working together. With that said, in answer to the question that was raised, sometimes it does come down to the village says one thing. They don't have any control over what decisions you make outside the village and vice versa. And sometimes it comes down to that. I would hope it would not come to that. And I hope there would be some mutual benefits and coordination of how you should move together to benefit everybody. But, you get to control what's outside of the village, and they get to control what's inside the village. So they could say no. But you move forward with what you think is right for the town then.
So there's a resident that's here that was on the CPRC committee, and she just mentioned that it was 10 rooms in the village, which is probably, I don't know what building or structure you could have that would be more than that based on the structures that are there, but that's you know, there has been hospitality in the village, right?
Oh, sure.
Historically,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
So
Oh,
wherever,
absolutely.
you know, maybe there's, anyway, it's a conversation that we need to have with
Sure.
the village, I think, just to understand what their threshold is, and maybe there's certain streets or certain areas where they think it's appropriate and others where
Is
they
Rainbow
don't.
Hill in
And
the village?
Rainbow Hill is the area outside the
It's outside.
village.
Right.
the village.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be, you know,
That was,
a terrific place
That was
if
once.
the village agrees.
but that was
terrific.
once a terrific.
Right,
place.
exactly. That was
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
something from what I heard as well. But
Because I guess my thoughts too are, if we're ready to continue and move forward, but the village is, you know, 4 steps behind us, do we want to slow our process down? Do we want to keep our process going? You know, that's all those are parts of the conversation we should be having with the village board. Do they?
Well, I think because this has been a town issue that raised this, and we voted to look at it as a piece of the comprehensive plan, we have to stay on our timeline.
Right.
We can fold them in by keeping them informed.
Mhm.
Maybe we do an initial meeting and saying, this is the report, which they probably have seen.
They- yeah.
We've had a second meeting with our consultant. Here's the timeline we're looking to pursue. There's going to be some overlapping questions that are going to be addressed to the village. We need some input from village government, maybe even the public, although the public did participate, the village public did participate
Right.
in the survey. So we do have some of that broken out. But I think we need to stay on our timeline.
And at
I
the
don't
same
think slowing
time-
it would help.
Exactly, exactly. And at the same time, we also have to have a public hearing on this.
Correct,
right,
So that would also give them time
correct.
to say, well, I'm concerned about this or
Right.
not.
I mean, there's
And-
fantastic things coming from the village. When the
Right.
Thorn Building
Yes.
gets done, the park gets done, there's going to be more influx of people into the community as destination. The village certainly, as identified in the survey, was an ideal place for it. But is there a place for it?
right.
But
Is it more conducive to be on the skirts of the village, but still have an impact on the village?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. The conversation did get started around hospitality, also with people, with businesses in the village wanting to have more traffic. So it's an important conversation. This morning, Margaret and Genevieve Glasson, who's a member of the head of the CSC for the village, we talked with the DEC about that NRI grant, that hybrid grant. And we were talking about just the importance of having all our resources, you know, natural resources be understood between the two. And so I think it makes sense, you know, it would be great for us to start having those conversations about every area where we overlap.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so,
Any other questions for Nan? I'm good. I guess
okay.
we're-
I think we're,
Yeah, I guess we're good, Nan.
Okay.
Thank
So
you,
what I
Yvonne.
will do is I'm going to send you kind of a couple different kinds of design standards, just so you can see the range from simple to more
Yeah.
complex.
Right.
And then I will take a look at your comprehensive plan and the proposal that I gave you and more definitively answer the question about, you know, what of those would be able to be included.
Perfect.
Nan,
Great.
if you also have examples or can give us some guidance on conservation subdivisions and what other towns do there, that would be helpful to look at.
Oh yeah,
too.
there's lots and lots of towns and lots of models. They're all pretty much based off the same kind of model, but yeah, I can send you that very easily.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nan.
Okay, very good. So I will get that together and send that out to you in, you know, the next couple of days then.
Right.
thanks so
Great.
much.
Okay.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Good seeing everybody.
Good night.
Yep.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I just made a note here that if we have a 10-day legal notice for the paper,